Do you keep telling yourself that you're going to spend more time being strategic and you have all the right systems to make it happen, but you keep drowning in the mundane, tactical, non-urgent things, despite how ineffective it makes you feel in your leadership role? Not every problem is yours to fix, and not every problem exists at the level you think it does. Most leaders skip the diagnostic part entirely. They feel they don't have the time, so they jump straight into solutions and end up solving the wrong problem. This episode is for all the highly productive folks out there who have color-coded calendars, impressive to-do lists, and are always the ones who get shit done. And yet, they feel like all they're doing is firefighting, but not accomplishing what they really want to accomplish. Does that sound like you? Do you keep telling yourself that you're going to spend more time being strategic and you have all the right systems to make it happen, but you keep drowning in the mundane, tactical, non-urgent things, despite how ineffective it makes you feel in your leadership role? If you are a productive doer, but want to be an equally awesome strategizer, this episode is for you. Welcome to The Hard Skills. I'm Dr. Mira Brancu. This is the first episode in a 3-part series on strategic clarity. Now, we've touched on some of these concepts before in my 4-part burnout series when we talked about the yes addiction, the responsiveness trap, and not building leadership capacity. And this series goes beyond just mitigating the burnout resulting from those issues. And we're now moving towards how to actually be more strategic, something that most highly successful busy leaders struggle with because they have so little time for thinking and reflection. I also recently released a 3-part series on ambiguous grief in the workplace. You might wonder, well, what does ambiguous grief in the workplace have to do with strategic clarity? It's actually not that unrelated. When organizations change drastically and you lose the identity or opportunities you once had, that ambiguous grief often creates a critical need for strategic clarity and career decisions. Maybe for you, maybe not for you, but certainly for some of your employees at the very least. So this series is about gaining that strategic clarity in the face of fast-paced change, uncertainty, and volatility. And the next series will focus on specifically applying it to career transitions. So let's get into it. Let me ask you 5 questions. See how many describe your current experience. 1, you're stuck in the weeds and can't transition to strategic thinking. Does that sound like you? 2, your days are full of activity, but you can't point to anything strategic you accomplished. 3, the emails, meetings, calendar requests keep coming and you can't curtail them. 4, you're stretched too thin across competing priorities and cannot see the forest for the trees. And 5, you know you should delegate, but you're the bottleneck. Everything waits for you. These are some of the questions from my Strategic Leadership Resiliency Assessment, which I'll link to in the show notes for you to get free access to, but it can create this black hole reactivity vortex. And just like a black hole, in space warps everything around it, right? Just like a black hole, it space warps everything around it, bending light, distorting time, pulling everything towards it. This vortex of reactivity warps your judgment. It makes everything look equally urgent, equally needy, equally important. It distorts your sense of what matters, and it pulls you into reactive mode no matter how strategic you want to be, and it makes it hard to climb out of. Now, you didn't intentionally somehow design your work life to be stuck in this reactive black hole mode, right? Nobody wants to be stuck there. Well, maybe a few people. I have many clients, though, who find this the most stressful and frustrating challenge of their leadership experience. And frankly, it's one of the key reasons leaders work with an executive coach to create the space and accountability to think strategically in order to make those clear decisions without all the noise. So what's the real problem? What's the gap between knowing what you need to do and actually doing it consistently? It's that you don't necessarily have a diagnostic framework that matches the level of complexity and constant change you're actually facing. The solutions we all think should work are made for simpler situations, not for complex, constantly changing situations. So what do I mean when I say you need a better diagnostic framework? Well, if you're like most common listeners or clients of mine, you came up into leadership through a highly technical field, like you were a healthcare provider before you entered into this leadership role, or an engineer, a researcher, a lawyer, an accountant. So you already have this skill set. You have diagnostic protocols to assess a wide variety of complex situations to help you figure out some kind of mental decision tree for how you address this stuff, right, in your own field. I'll take healthcare, for example. I worked in an organization that addressed some of the most complex comorbid conditions. Most patients had both mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, and they also had metabolic and cardiovascular conditions like diabetes or hypertension, all of which were interrelated. So you needed to know both how to decide what to treat first versus in combination, and which medications might be useful based on how they interact with each other and their side effects. And people's conditions are often changing depending on their life factors. So it's highly complex and requires a diagnostic protocol and mental mapping of various decision paths, right? Well, the same goes for complex, constantly changing leadership decision-making. Having strategic clarity means having a well-developed diagnostic framework you can apply to diagnose the full scope of a problem before addressing it, and it can be applied to any situation. So you don't have to have the content knowledge, you just need to have the process knowledge. Yet most leaders skip the diagnostic part entirely. Why? Well, they feel they don't have the time, so they jump straight into solutions and end up solving the wrong problem. They collapse all the problems into one bucket, the must be solved and I must fix it bucket. But here's the truth. Not every problem is yours to fix, and not every problem exists at the level you think it does. This is where the diagnostic framework comes in. So in this episode, I'm going to teach you 2 of the 3 parts of this framework. The third part is the hardest to evaluate, often requiring deeper work, often with a coach or advisor. So I'm going to save that for a future episode where it can get the time that it deserves. So I mentioned those 2 parts already. Not every problem is yours to fix, and not every problem exists at the level you think it does. This can become our 2x2 diagnostic grid, right? So the vertical organizational level is the first level, right? What level of the organization is implicated is the question. And the horizontal level is whose is this to solve? It's the responsibility level. So let me describe those 2 levels to you. The vertical organizational level asks, what level does this problem exist at? There are 4 levels you should be thinking about at all times: individual, team, organizational, and societal. The individual level are your skills, your decisions, your patterns, the things about you that you bring to the situation, your strengths, your liabilities. The team level are the team dynamics, processes, who does what, role clarity, systems for how the team works. The organizational level is all about the structure, the resources, the culture, the unspoken rules. And the societal, you got to think at the societal level sometimes, because it causes industry constraints, regulations, market impact, systemic forces. So those are the 4 levels for the vertical organization level. The question around what level does this problem exist at is what you're trying to resolve and understand better with that level. Now, the second part of the 2x2 is the horizontal responsibility level. And it asks, whose is it to solve? Often the answer is not just you. And it might not even be you at all, even if you think it might be, right? So think about that around 4 potentials. It's mine to change, my behaviors, my assumptions, my expectations. 2, it's the team level to solve together. 3, it's someone else's to own. It's their responsibility, their scope. And or 4, it's the organizational leadership to address, right? And that's like beyond any individual, the organization must address it. Now, when you can't find the time to answer these questions clearly, everything becomes your responsibility. In some ways, maybe that feels easier or simpler than having to involve a bunch of people or change policies, structures, procedures, but that means you also get stuck in reactivity mode, often responding to the same things all the time, over and over, and getting frustrated that it keeps coming up. That's your black hole reactivity vortex right there. So let me show you what solving at the wrong level or person looks like with a very common scenario. A team member comes to you frustrated about a colleague. You think, this must be a personality conflict. I'm going to need to coach them or train them on communication styles. Totally reasonable, extremely common, but not the best way to go about addressing a real issue. Why? Because you have come up with what appears to be a very obvious, simple reason for the problem with a very simple solution, but it might not be the accurate one. So let's apply the 2x2 part of the diagnostic framework. At what level is this happening at? This looks to be an individual level issue. Personality conflicts is an individual level issue. But when you dig deeper, the problem started because there was no clear decision-making process. When they disagree, there's no protocol for who decides. This is actually a team-level process problem, and I see it all the time. Team conflict occurring because of a missing process, and people ask me to help them address their interpersonal dynamics when what they needed was to understand whether there was a pattern behind these conflicts that kept repeating the problem. Now, second level is whose is it to solve? Well, now we know that it's not just theirs individually to solve. It's not just about their personalities, and it isn't only yours to address, right? A communication style training or coaching that you give to them won't address it all. The conflict would have still continued no matter how much coaching you did. This is in fact a team level gap that needs to be addressed at the team level with the whole team involved, helping you develop a better process to the decision-making trees that you have or processes that you have. So how might you start assessing these two parts of the diagnostic framework, the vertical level question and the horizontal person responsible question? Here are the kinds of diagnostic questions that you could ask. You could ask, is it strategic to my role? If not, who has strategic responsibility over this? Is this mine to fix? Or could this actually be someone else's responsibility entirely because it is in their scope of work or job description? What assumptions am I making about my role versus others' roles in this? What's in my control or sphere of influence that makes most sense for me to influence versus outside of that? Is this in any part a team level issue, like a pattern that occurs between multiple team members and not just with one? Is this in any part an organizational issue, like part of the culture, part of the operations, part of the policies or structure or unspoken rules? Is this also a systemic issue, like the effect on us related to how our society runs, the impact of capitalism, federal government regulations, things like that? That's a systemic issue that impacts everything around us. Are there recurring problems that keep coming up that are symptoms of how different problems at different parts of these levels are interacting? Can I track any patterns that keep occurring in the same way across the system? Those are the kinds of questions that you can ask yourself to understand these different levels. Most leaders exhaust themselves fixing the wrong things because they can't see what's actually driving the problem. Developing some kind of diagnostic clarity around what drives a problem and who is responsible changes everything. So let me show you how this worked with a real client. I have a client who was describing how, despite having an out-of-office responder message, she would still come back from vacations to hundreds of messages. I'm sure that you can absolutely relate. It happens to all of us. She felt like she had to bring her work laptop and check emails every day on vacation to avoid the punishment of having to manage those messages when she returned. She would also get these constant requests from people to meet with her in person to get information that was clearly easily provided by someone at a much lower level in the organization. She would get calendar invites without her permission that had no clear agenda, and she was constantly managing responding to each of these messages that alone would steal her time and attention away from strategic clarity. And it was only a portion of the constant demands on her time that she was dealing with. Now, part of the problem was that she had attempted to address this issue like so many leaders do, applying traditional time management advice to block the calendar for thinking time, say no, put up boundaries. The reality is it's not that easy because, as you keep learning from me, that is targeting a symptom, not the root cause. And the root cause is multi-pronged. So when we applied the diagnostic framework, one root cause of the issue we identified was how she was conditioned to always say yes and be responsive and agreeable, which made her feel like she was being rude when she couldn't meet everyone's needs. But stopping there would have ignored all the other contributing factors. So if we diagnose this using our framework, let's start with the level perspective. At first glance, this just looked like an individual level issue. She just needed better boundaries, right? But if you end there and tell her she needs better boundaries, it ignores all the other issues that are making it hard to do that. For her, we also realized that it was also partly organizational. Because number one, there was a lack of clarity about roles, authority, and information access in the system. And number two, there was an organizational expectation that she be responsive all the time like her boss. This second part could also have been an assumption that she made that she never checked. And once we finalize the diagnostic clarity fully, we use this information to try a few new things out. Now, at the responsibility level, the question about whose is it to solve, it actually wasn't hers alone. This involved also getting her assistant's help to know how to better triage and respond to the requests for her time. Her assistant was getting confused and overwhelmed with the kinds of requests and the intervention then required. And so what we needed to do for a solution is to first categorize the most commonly problematic requests that she got, and then to develop a specific set of triage protocols for her that then her assistant could understand easily and implement independently. Once we correctly assessed the full picture, it also helped her let go of certain self-imposed expectations and some of the social conditioning that was not fully hers to own. And that is solving at the right levels. So here's what I want you to take away. The next time you feel that black hole reactivity vortex pulling at you, pause and ask yourself, what level does this problem actually exist at, and whose is it to solve? Most of the time, you'll realize you've been solving at the wrong level, and that awareness is the first step to getting your strategic clarity back. Want to explore more around that root cause and get a few more tips? Take my free Leadership Clarity Assessment. The assessment takes 5 minutes and includes a 13-page guide to help you diagnose your biggest strategic challenge right now and how to start addressing it. You can visit my website at www.gotowerscope.com to find it, or check out the show notes to access it directly. If you want more structured support with specific tools, I'm also teaching a half-day strategic clarity lab on February 23rd, specifically designed to help you rebuild your diagnostic framework for prioritization and strategic setting. You will learn moving from reactivity, being scattered or overwhelmed, to how to move into strategic, intentional, and feeling in control of your leadership role. The enrollment deadline is February 12th. The link to register is also in the show notes. Or you can simply schedule a free consultation with me to explore this and other ways to work with me as a strategic executive advisory coach, a speaker, or team facilitator by going to gotowerscope.com and click on the big button that says free consultation. Next week, we are talking about the invisible architecture. If you're wondering why, even when you correctly identify right level to work at and the responsibility or the issue, and your strategic solution still fails, it's a very likely possibility that it's about the invisible architecture, the unspoken rules, hidden power structures, and organizational realities that actually determine success. It's the gap between how things are supposed to work versus how they actually work. And we are going to be talking about that in the next episode, one of my favorite topics. I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, and this is The Hard Skills. Stay steady, stay present, and keep building those hard skills muscles.